great to be here. Welcome to the second plenary session of the World Affairs Council. I must say I was delighted, but also dismayed to see education selected by you as one of the top 6 crucial national security issues for 2014. I was happy because my organization, the Council on Foreign Relations, has been trying very much to raise the profile of education issues in relation to U.S. foreign policy, U.S. national security. A couple of years ago, we started something called the Renewing America Initiative, which I headed the council, and it is based on the idea that continued U.S. leadership in the world depends very much on getting things right here at home. So that the council last year sponsored a big task force report entitled U.S. Education Reform and National Security that was co-chaired by former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice and former New York City Schools Chancellor Joel Klein. And under the Renewing America program, we've been doing quite a bit of work in the education space as well. We just published earlier this year a progress report on federal education policy with sort of a cool infographic attached. If any of you go for those kinds of things, it got very good pickup in the New York Times and focused really quite heavily on issues of inequality in education. It's actually a pretty cool infographic, I will say. So on our website, if you want to take a look. Just a couple of stats out of this report that on the infographic that suggests the scale of the challenge that we're dealing with here. If you look at 55 to 64-year-old Americans, they are the most educated cohort of any country in the world. You drop down to the 25 to 34-year-olds, we now rank 10th in the world. So significant slippage over a couple of generations. Compared to other advanced countries, so looking at the OECD countries, we enroll fewer children in preschool. So about 70% of US kids get into some kind of preschool program compared to more than 80% in the OECD average. And our college dropout rate is a lot higher, 54% compared to 31% in these countries. And a particular concern, as I said, was highlighted in this report, the achievement gap between children from lower income families and children from higher income families has been growing dramatically over the last half century. We have a public education system that unfortunately is highly unequal and has grown more so over time. And as we will talk about here, the focus of our discussion today, there are particular problems with achievements in the so-called STEM fields, so science, technology, engineering, and math, which are obviously so vital to our economic competitiveness and, as the title of this session suggests, to our national security. So I'm delighted to be joined today by Leland, Melvin, who is the Associate Administrator for Education at Nassau, and you heard his bio in the introduction. We were originally supposed to have 2 panelists, Michelle Reed, the former Washington Schools Chancellor, and your boss, Charles Alden, the NASA Administrator. And I was kind of worried, so we've gone from 2 to 1, how are we going to handle this? And then I looked at Mr. Melvin's biography. If you went to my daughter's middle school and took a poll of all the boys and asked them, what do you want to be when you grow up? Half of them would say, I want to be a professional football player. And the other half would say, I want to be an astronaut. Well, it turns out Leland Melvin's been both. So he played briefly in both the National Football League and Canadian Football League, which is near and dear to my heart, and was an astronaut on 2 space shuttle missions, right? 2 of the Atlantis missions. But most importantly for our session here today, he is, as was said in the introduction, a leader in federal efforts to strengthen STEM education in our schools. He serves as co-chair of the Federal Coordination STEM Education Task Force, which is charged with implementing President Obama's ambitious goals in this area to include training 100,000 new highly qualified STEM teachers and graduating 1 million new STEM-trained young people. So let's start by outlining the problem. What are the issues in STEM education? Why should groups like this, the World Affairs Council Concerted Foreign Policy, be worried about this issue?
I think the biggest part of the problem right now is that we have so many kids that are not even thinking about the careers that they can have in the future. So you have students in the K-12 space that now I think it's down to the 3rd or 4th grade, that if they're not interested or excited about science, technology, or engineering, they will not see themselves as potential scientists or engineers. It used to be at the middle school, 6th and 7th grade is the framework when the kid would be turned off, but now it's even earlier. So that's why it's so important that for economic viability, national security, all these STEM jobs that will help lead our nation to excellence, these kids are now being turned off in third and fourth grade. So a lot of the underrepresented, underserved community, minorities and women, in 2040, the minority will be the majority. So if we're not even getting these students in third and fourth grade to think about these opportunities in STEM, then now we're having a bigger problem. So Ted, Ted mentioned the 1 million STEM graduates in the next 10 years. When students go to college for a STEM degree, 60% of them drop out or go to another degree because they don't see the relevance of intro chemistry. Or many of you have gone to classes that have 500 students in a class, and the professor, when you walk in the room, the professor says, look to your right, look to your left, because those people are gone. This is a hard class, I'm a hard professor. So we're looking at curriculum redesign in those early freshman and sophomore classes so that they're more hands-on, project-based, where people are learning and working together, just like we do in the real world. After you graduate, you work in teams. And so these are some of the problems. I think the third and fourth grade, kids getting turned off to science and technology. They're into technology because they're all on these things, right? I mean, they're all playing games and working on things. But when you move into the classroom, this is shut down. In a typical classroom, there's a minimum of technology, and the kids are actually working the technology when they get out of the classroom. So there's a gap there between the in-classroom and the out-of-classroom time. One of the things that we're really focusing on is the out-of-classroom time to get the kids really interested in something. There's a group, and maybe we'll get into this in a minute, but there's a group that I'm working with the MacArthur Foundation, and we're looking at giving kids digital badges for doing something excellent. So we had a thing in Chicago this past summer called Summer of Learning, where they took middle school girls, underrepresented girls in this community, and they brought them in to it wasn't just an out-of-school session to make jewelry. So the interest was, hey, I'm going to make some jewelry. This is pretty cool. So they go in, and to make their jewelry, they have to put circuit boards and LEDs and things in the jewelry. And they have to learn how to code, to program, to make the circuits flash and where they don't flash. So we back into them into thinking they're making jewelry, but they're really doing electrical engineering and computer science. So that's one way to start changing the paradigm of, in a classroom, you learn about these things with a lecturer speaking to the students versus them building, creating, designing, and doing things that they're interested in.
Yeah, I think we plunged right into the heart of the challenge here, which is really how to make these subjects and these careers fascinating to our kids at a younger age. I certainly watch my own kids in the public schools, and many of you have this experience. I don't actually think these fields are taught very well. They teach science out of the textbooks. There's a lot of basics that you need to grasp to be able to do science well, but instead of sort of explaining to the kids and showing them why they should learn these basics, they just drive them through the basics. And the kids are like, why do I need to? My son's busy memorizing the periodic table, which, okay, but I'm not sure that's
the chemistry majors.
I mean, you need to know the periodic table, right? Fair enough, you need to know the periodic table, but it's not necessarily jazzing them about the subject. So let's go deeper to that. How do we begin to scale some of these things up and make science more exciting on a broader scale?
So the two numbers that Ted mentioned were 100,000 excellent STEM teachers and 1 million STEM graduates. So if you think about an elementary classroom, there are educators in that classroom that are teaching science that do not have science degrees. And they are trying to figure this out themselves as they go along. They have a curriculum. They are teaching exactly to what the curriculum says. It's been pushed down from the superintendent of schools and on down. This is how you teach, this is what you do. Now, when I was in science, you usually need about 3 different ways to explain a problem. Because the first way you explain it, what's your name? Peter. So if I'm sitting here explaining, Newton's laws to Peter, and he doesn't get it on the first time, then I don't have another way to explain it. So Peter doesn't get it. You probably get it, but Peter doesn't get it. And then for the rest of the discussion, he's lost. And that concept has to build from that point on. If you're lost in that one piece, and if Peter doesn't feel like he's really engaged in the class, and he's not gonna go ask for help after the class with the teacher. And then the teacher's also working, 24/7, using their own resources. They don't understand the content themselves. And so how can we then get 100,000 excellent STEM teachers that can be a cohort of teachers that can help these other teachers to understand these concepts? NASA, the other federal agencies are using our mentors, our resources, our assets to actually give interest to the teachers. Yesterday, I had my deputy and one of my employees fly in the zero-G airplane, which is effectively called a flying comet. Reasons you understand. We fly 40 parabolas, and if you get sick in the first one, it's a really long flight. The 40 parabolas are allowing teachers to actually perform science in microgravity for their students. So when they come back to, we have professional development workshops, when they come back to their classrooms, their teachers are astronauts now, because they have floated what they think is in space, but they floated. So now we have teachers that are inspired and engaged. They're doing hands-on experience things. They're not just teaching to the curriculum. We're giving them other ways to explain things. And now their students are jazzed because their teachers are astronauts. So that interest to the teachers and to the students is just so important.
Just quickly, why does this matter so much for the federal government? It's not just about training folks for industry. You showed me some stats on STEM grads working in NASA and other places. See, now you lost it on your iPad. I put it out there for you. But I was quite struck by that, by how dependent the federal workforce is indeed on having people properly.
If you take a look at the Partnership for Public Service with Lewis Allen Hamilton, here's the infographic you cannot see. But if you look at the landscape, NASA is the leading agency for STEM employees. We have 68% of our workforce is STEM out of 17,000 employees. NRC is next at 63%, VA is 56%, HHS is 50%, and then on down the line to DOE 32%. So I think the average age of the STEM employee at NASA is about maybe 47 to 48. And so when you think about the pipeline of people that have to backfill those jobs to keep us economically viable and competitive in this global marketplace, we're not getting these third and fourth graders in the pipeline to think of themselves in these fields. And so that's one of the biggest problems for the federal government, is that we don't have these students coming in. And then, I know we were going to talk about the H1N1.
Maybe we might get into that, but keep going.
But so that's why it's so important that the federal space, and what we're doing with the CoSTEM, the Committee on STEM Education, we are 14 agencies that do STEM. We're looking at 5 strategic areas that can help with the 100,000 teachers.
So quickly, this is a big White House formed interagency group involving all the different departments of federal government that really care about this issue, right? You're trying to get on the same page and work in the same direction.
So we have, everyone's doing their own thing. How do we leverage our different programs, say for instance in STEM engagement? If the kid is not interested, they're not going to do it. So we have programs that we reach out to K-12, specifically middle school students in the summertime. They do hands-on experiential activities that are based on current missions. So that makes it relevant to them today. The other piece about education is we teach in these little silos. And how does that calculus class or that algebra class relate to the bigger picture of how I fit into the world? And so that's another disconnect that we're not teaching to the students. Why is this relevant and why do I care? So those are some of the other things we're doing.
What kind of levers does the federal government have in this area? One of the things, for foreign policy crowd and my organization, we tend to be very focused on the executive branch, right? If you're worried about defense policy, you think about what the Pentagon's doing. If you're worried about diplomacy, you think about what the State Department's doing. Education, the federal government's got a pretty small piece of this, right? Education, basically something that's run at the state level. The amount of money the federal government has on this is fairly small. So, we declare that education is a national security issue, but it's not, we can't mobilize resources in the way the Pentagon can be mobilized to deal with an emerging security threat. So how does the federal government make a difference in this area that really does have an impact on the ground in our schools?
I think, the impetus for the CoSTEM committee itself came out of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. And out of that we said that K through 12 space is extremely important for getting these teachers and students turned on, but also the graduate space for the graduate degrees that are helping us be rocket scientists and astronauts and so forth. And if you think about STEM education in the federal space, it's about $3 billion that we spend in that area. That pales in comparison to the $1.1 trillion we spend outside of the federal government for STEM. And I think, if we can leverage the dollars that every agency has so that we're not duplicative of programs, that we're all working towards the same types of activities that will help give the most bang for the buck, the most best practices, and inspire the most teachers and students, then that's going to help us solve this problem.
So, what do you do to get the 100,000 teachers, for instance? Federal government's not going to pay to train 100,000 STEM teachers, not directly, but presumably is going to try to leverage the resources it has to encourage that.
Actually, we're looking at choosing cohorts of teachers to be part of that 100,000. So those will be master teachers who will actually possibly get an extra stipend. We have student teachers at NSF and other agencies called Einstein Fellows. So they come from the classroom, come out. We have an Einstein Fellow working at NASA who is promoting NASA content technology, and then helping take that and package that back into the classrooms in those states. So we are kind of doing that as cohorts now with other programs. NASA has a program where we teach teachers how to use our NASA content, and they get credit for it towards certification. So those are ways that we can do that. But this bigger picture for the 100,000 teachers will be cohorts specifically targeted going back into those districts to spread that.
Okay, great. Let's talk a little bit about the issue of minority participation, women in STEM, because the numbers are not encouraging. A little better on women in recent years. Minority participation, very low. What are the issues there, and how do you try to tackle them?
So, I was in the minority.
Only until 2040.
I grew up in a small town in Lynchburg, Virginia, and both my parents are middle school teachers. And so I had the advantage of, if you do anything in school that you're not supposed to be doing, it will instantly telecommuted to my parents. So that kind of kept me on the straight and narrow for the most part. But you have these cases where students, they have no hope. There are communities that there's all kinds of negative things going on, and the school is the only place of safe, well, sometimes it's the only place where it's safe, and you have a place where you can go. But these kids, they don't see themselves out of this community, this microcosm. And so one of the things that we must do is to allow these children to see people that look like them. I was in a school in Brooklyn talking to some students, and one kid in the back of the room was just acting up, making all kinds of gestures and things, and I, at the end of the conversation, at the end of the talk, I went up to him and said, "Hey, why are you doing this? What's going on?" He said, "Well, my father's not at home, my mom doesn't care about me, and this is the only time I have to act out." The kid was brilliant. He was rocket science brilliant, but he was acting out because he had nothing to care about. The president, I think, called in 15 presidents of universities, I think last month, to talk about how can we get these kids that are very sharp, that are brilliant, but don't see themselves as going to an Ivy League college. And so these are other types of things that we can pinpoint in individuals that have the capability, but just don't see themselves in that environment because they don't see people in their community going to that university or places. So I think a lot of it is in the grassroots and helping the parents understanding what they need to do to contribute to helping these children get on the right path. I go into a school and I talk to some parents and I say, instead of buying your kid a pair of LeBron James tennis shoes for $200, why don't you buy them an iPad? With some apps on the math and science in there, because that is the gateway. Those shoes will be worn out of time, but this is the gateway to the future in education. So those are some of the things we do at NASL.
It's a tough one. You can see the ways, get back to the state quality theme, the ways in which it perpetuates itself, right? My son's struggling in chemistry, we've got him a tutor, right? And he's getting A's now. Well, if you're not in a position where you can afford to get a tutor for your kid, he's going to flounder on his own. And so really, really does kind of underscore the challenge.
And you know, this digital diva thing I mentioned earlier, really going to where they are. I mean, I was playing football in my day, but we took a physicist into one of the football camps, which were teaching kids how to play football, and we had them then go and teach the physics of football. So something that they're already interested in, and now we can again back in them with physics and say, look, if you know physics, you get better ball. You might get drafted, you're gonna go. Oh, really? So now, so, you know, go where they are, and the music, the arts, you know, we talk about STEM, but also there's the arts, the STEAM piece of this. And using the arts to help the kids interested and motivated to go into STEM. We, last year, just about a year and a half ago, Will.i.am, who's an entertainer, came down to the shuttle launch, the launch of the Curiosity rover, the Kennedy Space Center. And he was so inspired by this that he went home and wrote a song called Reach for the Stars. This song, he'd been beamed to the rover on Mars and back, the kids thinking about, how did you beam a song from Mars? How is it encoded? How is it encrypted? What are the mechanisms associated with it? So they're listening to this song, and now they're thinking about the STEM associated with the arts to create the music, as well as to beam it back and forth. So non-traditional partners is another thing we must adopt in this effort to help train these kids.
That's a good song. I want you to think about questions. I'm going to ask one more, and it's going to be a very pointed one, and then I want to open it up to the audience. So you mentioned football. Okay, so 50-yard pass, you were a wide receiver. What's the optimal launch angle for the quarterback?
50 yards, it's a 27.56 degrees.
Okay, I'd like to open it up for questions, and I'm reminded to wait for the microphones that are, here we go, floating around the room here. So there's a microphone over there. I'll start on the far right here. And please identify yourself.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Cecilia Nipp. I'm Director of Global Relationships and Cultural Exchange at Ursuline Academy in Dallas, which is an all-girls private school. And my question is, even in your introduction, you talked a lot about preparing kids to be competitive and for the competitive global world. But what I'm always left with is the question about, are we preparing kids to collaborate? And so could you just please comment on what are we doing to prepare kids to collaborate?
Good question. So I think I mentioned a little bit in the undergraduate piece of getting students working together. I think, you know, project-based classrooms is one way that we can get, you get your history, you get your English, you get all of your subjects wrapped around, let's say, the sending a rocket to the moon. Well, what is the historical piece of that? You have to write an essay about how we're going to do that. And then what are the physics and the material science issues and all of these things that you can wrap around into a classroom. I was talking to about 15 Fortune 100 technology companies last week that happened, 2 weeks ago, happened today. And one of their biggest issues with hiring these brilliant scientists and engineers is that they can't write and they can't communicate. And so there's a huge part of that when you're building a space station, the people that don't speak the same language as you, that you've got to figure out how to put these things together. And I think those 21st century skills are so important. But having summer programs where kids are building things together and have to report out on it is something that NASA is trying to do. We have internships, fellowships, and scholarships where the students come in and have a mentor that actually they're working on a project together. The mentor is pushing them, prodding them, and helping them work in collaborative sessions with some of the.
I think it's one of the real strengths of American education that I think is underappreciated. We talk about all the engineers and Chinese who graduate. They're still not terribly innovative because it's a lot of rote education, and they send their best students come to our universities because they realize they're getting a better education. Gentleman right here.
Dave Moore from Minnesota. My wife is very involved in the Minnesota International Center. As a couple, we would like, as a couple and as patriots, we would like to make a difference. And we would like to do it with our limited resources, but ideally in a way that sets the pace nationally. What should we do? All of our research so far is that that this is a regional or local problem and it has to be solved locality by locality. And yet we want to do this as patriots for the sake of the nation. What should we do?
What are you doing now?
Researching.
Researching.
Hi, Lenny Moore. I guess the question is, if we have certainly limited resources, but would like to donate funds to an organization or an effort, what are some of the ways that we could feel that we could help make a difference on a larger scale if possible, or in fact, is it something that each community has to tackle locally? Is really, I think.
Can I make a suggestion on this? I'll be interested in your response. I was thinking about this the other day, because the Washington Post every year publishes a special section for all Met athletes in the Washington area. So these are our great athletes, and we're going to, and we're going to admire them and laud their feats. Why don't you create a local award, a series of awards for the best science, technology, engineering students? Get them in the local paper, get their picture up there, give them awards, show that there's a real status associated with success in those areas. The same way we accord tremendous status to successful athletes. I mean, you've seen both sides of this, but there's a lot of pride that comes with being a star athlete. You see less in these areas, which is so important. So that'd be my suggestion.
That's a fantastic idea. But I think the other piece, in the elementary school space, these teachers are so underprepared to teach these subjects. And so if there's a way to embrace, to help in that space, I think it's a really thing. I mean, PTA going into classrooms, helping the teachers that here are resources can be utilized in this area. I mean, my parents were teachers. I see all the things they had to do outside of their school day, and their own personal resources they had to spend to put things in their classroom to be engaging for their students. And I think at the grassroots level, it's to that teacher, because that's the multiplying factor. If they're teaching 30 students, and then if you get a cohort of those teachers banding together, looking at best practices, then you have impacted that community. And then if you let that replicate into the district next to that one, and the next to that one. So, I mean, grassroots stuff is fantastic because, it's authentic, it's pure, it's real. And you show that you care.
Minnesota is one of our great international cities, by the way. A lot of people know it's incredibly connected internationally. So let's shift over to this, and we have a microphone. We'll go to the back here. I'll try to spread it around here.
Hi, I'm Doug Savage from the Institute for World Affairs in Milwaukee. A lot of the initiatives you described impact in-service teachers. I'm wondering, is there any thought to how you can impact systemically sort of the pipeline? By that I mean getting into the schools of ed and looking at the curriculum that goes with teacher preparation.
Yeah, we are actually doing pre-service and in-service teachers, and that's one of the areas that the COSTEM is looking at, how we best build this pipeline, because there are a lot of students that see themselves as being educators, but then they don't want to take the other courses around education. So partnerships with the engineering department, with the science departments, with those departments of education, to have them working together to create better pre-service teachers and then in-service teachers. So that's one of the areas we're actually focusing on, the pre-service.
Let's go into the middle right here.
Hi, Ethan Brown from the South Dakota World Affairs Council, and it kind of corresponds with that question there. So I was a biology education major for about 3 years before I dropped the education and went just biology and chemistry. Do you think part of the problem with these K-12 teachers, especially in the STEM fields, not having the background or degrees they need, do you think it's because the students that are graduates in the STEM fields find themselves going directly into the workforce outside of education? Exactly. And if so, how do we correct that? How do we convince them to stay, at least for a while, in the education, or to come back to the education field?
So that's the value of an educator. I mean, if you look at it, the dollars that you get to be an educator, you can be a biologist and go out and make more money than you can be an educator. And that's why this cohort of 100,000 teachers will actually get, I can't remember what the dollar amount is, but for their excellence as a teacher, they will get, compensated for that. And then that will help maybe grow more cohorts of teachers that see that, hey, if I'm smart, if I'm learning how to do these things in a more systematic way, if I'm getting more education, then that will be beneficial for me down the road as an educator.
And, this is one of the things Michelle Reed was trying to do in DC,
Right.
whatever you think about the totality for efforts, she was trying to
Right.
reward the strong teachers. Let's go right in the middle here in the back.
My name is Wendy, and I'm with the World Affairs Council of New Orleans. And New Orleans has been referred to as a testing ground for what could be next in the American education system in general. So I have two questions. One is, what role do you see subnational groups like TFA, AmeriCorps, or even this whole charter school movement that's going on? What role do you see that having in improving the American education system? And then the second question centers around, you talked a lot about how beneficial it would be if we went in right now to the K-12 schools and really started working with those children to put them in the right mindset to enter the STEM fields. But even if you were to go into next year's starting kindergarten class and successfully implement all that, great. But what do we do with the people who are in K-12 right now who've already missed that boat? Is there something that nationally or subnationally we can really do to address those people who've already fallen through the gaps?
Good question. I'll start with the second one. So the ones that have fallen through the cracks already, again, you've got to find something that interests them. I mean, they're not going to try to succeed in education if it's not to be something that, that's really interesting to them. And this MacArthur work that we're doing is totally going in the out-of-school space. It's rewarding students with digital badges. These badges that we're looking at maybe being used for college credit. DePaul University right now is taking badges for credit. We have the MOOCs, the massively open online courses that MIT, Stanford, all these universities are teaching, and it's all free. So you don't necessarily need a college degree to know how to do things. And so there's associate's degrees, there are the guy who runs the MIT Media Lab, Joy Ito, he does not have a college degree, but he's brilliant. So rewarding people for the knowledge and not just for the parchment, and they can do the job. So that's the people that are disenfranchised now, get them something that's going to interest them, and then apply that to badging and maybe some type of application to a university. The first part was a charter school piece. I'm no expert in education. I come into this from an inspiration and using NASA's assets and content. I know that a big movement after Katrina for in New Orleans, we had these charter schools kind of cherry picking the best schools and showing that this school is great and wonderful in STEM. I think it was SciTech or something. And so we have to be equitable when we think about charter schools as well as public schools and be honest about what are we really doing in these applications. But I'm not an expert in those areas, but I think interest for the kids, for the charter schools being equitable and not just cherry picking the best schools, students to say that's the best.
We have time for one last question.
One more. By my watch, I have 5 minutes left.
That's because I really get the last question.
Okay, sounds great. Well, why don't we go, since you got personally identified, Peter, we'll give you the chance for the last question here. Our microphone is coming.
I had a learning disability. My question is, how do we get the federal government to put on the agenda, people are talking about, the study of social studies? We in Atlanta have developed over the last several years series of education materials that have been used to train teachers in 11 different states, thousands of workshops. Several years ago, to show you how critical this is to the national security of this country, the Air Force came to us, a small nonprofit in Atlanta, Georgia, and said, our officer corps doesn't seem to know much about other people's cultures. They spent millions of dollars to buy our materials to put into the Air University, the Air Force College ROTC program, and then we had to travel around the world with teachers to train instructors as to how to use them. Now, if you've got that kind of a problem, most people in this country, in this room, except for the young ladies from Personal Academy and a few others, belong to that top 1% education. We can't comprehend the deficiencies that exist down below us. And this is an issue of competitiveness. I mean, I've seen in Atlanta, major corporations go to overseas markets and try to establish themselves like they would do in some suburb of New York and fail. See, you can't make a sale if you don't stand in the other fellow's shoes. Now, this is a fundamental problem because I found that the priority in education in this country, at the government, at the federal level, the state level, and in the private sector, is science, math, reading, testing. Social studies is not on the agenda. Yet we've got 5% of our population don't think today that the Japanese were our allies against the Germans in the Second World War. They don't even join Washington.
Yeah, can I make just a quick comment, and then I'll turn it over to you. These things shouldn't necessarily be zero-sum. I mean, I think the issue of foreign language training in U.S. schools is a huge problem. We published a paper last year on foreign languages in U.S. economic competitiveness. I think it's better read than anything we've produced out of this Renewing America initiative. Because it's if you're going to sell to the world, which increasingly we have to do, 30% of our economy is tied up in trade now. You go back to the 1960s, it was 10%. You need to have cultural and language skills to be able to do what the world. We're definitely falling down that. I don't think it's STEM or these skills, but there are a lot of areas that you might address.
Before the student can get interested in studying Spanish, he has to learn something about Spain.
Yep, or Mexico, or
And I think in the classroom, getting out of the silo of just teaching one thing at a time, you've got to see how everyone's interconnected in a more global way, and that will allow you to say, okay, the space station's going over Italy right now. What are they doing down there? When I was in space, I had African American, Asian American, French, German, Russian. The first female command on the International Space Station. So we're like a Benetton commercial.
you got to tell your true story. That was really good.
Quickly, when my first job on my first mission was to install this Columbus laboratory to the International Space Station. And when I got the assignment, there were about 15, 20 German flight controllers in Houston in mission control, and they were high-fiving me, hey, you're going to install our module, we waited for 10 years. And so one guy who walked out of the room, he turns to me and says, Leland, we've been waiting for 10 years. Don't screw it up. So as I'm pulling the hand controller and this module's coming closer and closer to the station, I'm like, don't screw it up. Save the day. But they depended on me. I mean, all of Europe was depending on Leland, Melvin. No pressure, right? International diplomacy, working with other people, I mean, that's something that we do every day at NASA because we put this station together without doing fit checks. The fit check was in space. Did it work or not? So that's one, I think the space program is one of those diplomatic areas that we don't even, we just see the STEM piece, but the international relations, to get these treaties signed and all these things are part of that social studies, part of the social studies.
Thank you very much.
Since education is a national security imperative, I hate to suspend this conversation. But when I hear someone mention donating funds on a grassroots level in a scalable way, I think of the World Affairs Council. One program we run is the Academic World Quest Challenge for high school students. But I am now envisioning a possible collaboration between the World Affairs Council and NASA to do the kind of after-school projects for teachers. And since Leland Melvin, you personify an essential government employee, I want to meet with you. Ted Alden of CFR, we always love to collaborate with you, and thank you for moderating. Thank you, gentlemen, both, for an excellent conversation.